Hello and welcome to Your Average Bear Gaming. I'm George, and today we're going to add to my towel collection by painting one of these. I have no idea what kit I'm going to use. Let's pick one. Okay, looks like we're doing the Crisis battle suits. Now in focus. Let's see how this goes. Will there be magnetization? I don't know. Let's find out. That way. So I'm building these guys, the Tau XV8 Crisis battle suits. And when I started this project, I wasn't sure which direction I was going to go. Specifically, was I going to attempt to magnetize these, or are these troops that I really don't want to magnetize because they're so finicky, yada yada yada. So I decided to build them to see what the models said to me. I know it sounds goofy as all get out, but I like to, I build the models and see what the models look like, and that helps me determine which direction I'm going to go. And, well, if you are watching this, you saw the title of the video and you clicked on it, so you know what I'm about to say, right? I think I need to magnetize these guys. And I'll give you a sense for the scope of it. So there's one of the Crisis suits. This kit comes with 3 of them. This is from the Star Pulse Cadre collection, the box set from last year, December 2020. So there's 3 of them. They're pretty neat. They're kind of like stubby versions of the Cold Star battlesuit I built not too long ago. So far, not a big problem, right? What's the big deal? You're just going to magnetize some stuff on these guys. Here's the scope of the problem. So, it's a little hard to make out since it's gray on gray, but I have a bunch of weapons. There's a bunch of weapon options. There's this, I think it's like a rapid fire pulse laser thing or whatever. There's 4 of those. These are some shield emitters. There's 3 of those. There's 4 of these guys. I'm not quite sure what they are, but they look tubular, kind of cool. There's 4 of these guys, which is like a pulse rifle or something. I don't know, looks pretty neat. And then there's 3 of these guys. These are like, these look like they might be flamers, like an alien design flamer, because it's got some tanks and it's got this little like pilot light, I guess. So the problem is that there's a ton of work to do. So each one of these, so there's 4, 8, 12, plus 3 is 15, plus 3 is 18. There's 18 different weapons that you have to magnetize, and there's 2 arms that you get to magnetize them to. So there's a lot of magnetizing. So it's going to take a bit. If you are thinking about this, I would probably say, hey, look, just pick a couple of weapon loadouts that you'd want to do. And don't worry about magnetizing the whole kit and caboodle, because you're going to be here forever. I would also say that maybe magnetizing this kit, it's kind of right at the boundary, right? So I like to magnetize vehicles. I do not like to magnetize troops. This kit is kind of right in the middle, right in between a troop choice and a vehicle choice, which means, for the purpose of magnetization, that you're going to be working with small magnets and small areas to magnetize, so you have to work really clean. So if you're not really experienced with magnetization, then maybe this isn't the kit that you want to try it with, because you're going to have to drill small holes for small magnets, and you're going to get super glue in places that you don't want to get it. It's going to be a challenge. But having said all that, I am not at the skill level where I should be attempting this, but I do have a YouTube channel. And for some reason, my viewers seem to be really attracted to magnetization videos. Maybe people like YouTubers to suffer. given my video history, I can relate. Or maybe it's just that there is this pent-up demand for like, look, I want to magnetize, but it seems overwhelming. I'm not sure what I want to do. And people come to channels like mine to see, you know, kind of the best way to do it, or a way of doing it that works. So, having said all that, I'm going to magnetize. Before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about this model kit. So, it's not a new kit. If you've been playing Warhammer 40k, you've probably seen these guys, you've probably fought against them. They're pretty neat looking. So they're about the same number of parts, more or less, as a much larger Cold Star battlesuit. But it's scaled down quite a bit. And I think the proportions are a little weird. Like, it's a little squatty. If you look at the shoulder joints, they're really far out of the body. It gives it a really weird, excessively wide look. It doesn't have that graceful look like the Cold Star does. It has a chunky, almost dreadnoughty look, but it isn't boxy enough to be a dreadnought. It's this weird combination of Tau graceful and Space Marine chunky dreadnought. It's not a great looking model. I mean, it's cool, but it isn't, I don't know. It's not Cold Star battlesuit cool. So there's that. And so because it's in a bunch of small pieces, it's going to scratch that itch. If you're really into building models, then you're going to have a nice time with this one, because there's a lot of pieces that you have to assemble to make this guy. So there's, you know, you're going to have lots of fun building this thing. The other side of that coin is that there are so many small pieces, they all have to be attached to the sprue somehow, which means flashing. So I'll give you a sense for just how much of it. So I've done my best to kind of clean and scrape off these parts, but there's just an awful lot of flashing. Now, look at that top of that head. Most of those parts have been scraped, sanded, and so when I apply the primer, they should be mostly gone. So there's a little piece of dog fur on this model that just refuses to go away. And I think it's because it's glued on there. Ow. Okay. The leg fell off. So there's a lot of flashing, and so because there's a lot of pieces, you're going to be doing a lot of flash removal, and because they're small, there's going to be a lot of flashing in really awkward spots. So that is less than fun. So, you know, it's kind of a mixed bag, but I'm hoping that the results are going to be cool, and I'll be like, you know what, it was worth all that extra effort. At this point, I'm not entirely sure that's going to be the way it goes, but, you know, this project is young. Let's see how this goes down. So the first thing we're going to do is to make it so that we're going to magnetize every weapon combination is going to go on each arm. So this kind of long-barreled weapon will be able to be attached here, or or I can do the same thing here or here with this other weapon. So every one of these 18 different weapons will be able to be mounted on any one of these two arms across all three models. So that means we're going to do some drilling, but most importantly, we're going to have to be really careful with our polarization. In other words, I want to make sure that if I mount I think it goes here, yeah, here we go. So if I mount this weapon to this arm, right, and the north-sided pole is facing out, then the south-facing pole has to be facing out on this weapon. So every single weapon, I have to make sure that the south-facing pole is facing out of the weapon, and on every arm, both sides, the north-facing pole has to be facing out. Of course, the problem is that magnets aren't labeled north and south, not in real life, maybe in cartoons and educational videos. And in real life, they're just little discs. See, here's a stack of magnets, And if you pull one off, there's no clear way of knowing which one is north and south. The only way to do this is to either mark them as you're using them and keep that mark consistent, or to identify the polarity in one way or the other. So I'm going to use my method of kind of keeping track of polarity because it seems to work for me. And my method is to use a stack of smaller magnets, or at least different size magnets, to designate the orientation. In fact, I'll clean up this stack because there's two different heights of magnets on this stack. Let's be cleaner about it. Okay. So instead of using a Sharpie to say, hey, look, this side in, this side out, I'm using this stack of magnets. It's smaller, so I can easily pick them out. And if I keep them attached to this one side, I will always know which direction the magnets should be facing. So that's the technique I'll be using to keep track of my magnet polarity. As so far as where we're going to mount the magnets, you'll see this little tab right there. This tab, I'm going to yank this arm off because it's not actually glued on. This tab goes on the arm right there. There's this little slot in the arm. Now it has this cool little, it has some detail in there that's molded into the plastic in case you don't want to take a weapon, right? So there's an option that all you want is one weapon on the other hand, and this hand is clear, so you know you can paint some detail into the arm. That's a pretty cool little feature. But this tab goes in that slot like so. If you're gluing, then ta-da, your job is done. But because we're magnetizing, we're going to add a magnet here, right where the tab is, and we're going to add a magnet right there, right where the slot is. And we're going to use the biggest magnet that we can fit cleanly. So let's find out what size magnet we should be using. After rifling through all of the magnets that I own, I've settled on this size. These are 2 millimeters wide by 1 millimeters tall. I don't know what that converts over into American or imperial units, but 2 by 1, as measured by my little tape measure, because I don't have calipers and I have a horrible organizational system, so I don't actually know what size these are. 2 by 1 is my best estimate, and they're the smallest magnet that I have, and I'm going to use that here because they're small enough that I can get them comfortably in the weapon slot. The arm slot is a little more generous. I could probably use something a little larger, but I'm going to use these small ones for two reasons. One, I have a lot of them, and so you're going to need a lot of them for this magnetization project. Less if you decide to selectively magnetize, not magnetize all the things like I'm about to do. So I have a lot of them, but they're also small enough that I can fit 2 in each spot. What I mean by that is, in this slot, my plan is to have 2 magnets go in this slot, kind of right next to each other. I'm going to do the same thing to the weapon. I'm going to shave off this tab, drill some holes in there, and add 2 magnets side by side. The reason I want to do that is because if you have a single disc magnet in this slot and in this slot, what's going to end up happening is that when you put it on, depending on the weight and of the weapon and so on and so forth, or the movement of the model, it's going to want to droop. And nobody likes droopy guns. Not on their models anyway. I don't know when you would want droopy guns. So this is a technique I've toyed with playing, but I've avoided it for now, up until now, because it's really finicky. Gluing down 2 magnets side by side is a pain in the behind, because as you're gluing, they want to attract each other, repel each other. It is a pain, but it's probably going to be worthwhile in this case because we want to keep the weapons from drooping. There's other methods you could probably use. So you can just use a signal magnet here, a signal magnet there, and to keep them from drooping by adding some friction between the magnets, but I haven't found a ton of success with that approach. So as long as I have to do this, I'm going to do it right. So the very first step is to pluck all the arms off of my models. Okay. Now that I've pulled all the arms off my models, I think the way to go here is going to be to just destroy all that detail, because I want to put two magnets in there. Even though they're pretty small, I don't want to drill too much. So there's some detail there that I'm just going to need to get rid of. I'll mount the magnets in there and then cover this up with some epoxy putty to make it look smooth. It won't be as cool as this detail that you have here, but at least it'll still look good. I think that'll be fine. Okay, so the first thing you have to do is pick the right tool for the job. Since my idea here is to hollow out an existing hole as opposed to creating a hole, a drill isn't going to do the job, a drill bit. I'm going to use this, I think it's an engraving tool. I don't know what it's called really, but it does a really good job of cutting the surface around it as opposed to kind of in front of it. So this will help me reduce the penetration of my cut, but give me a nice clean hole here that I'll try to elongate it to make it look like it's more rectangular. Now this bit is probably too large. It's just the smallest one that I have of its type. It's the only thing I seem to have that'll do the job. I took a look at these kind of little stone deals, but those are also too wide. So I'm just going to have to be content with the size of the hole that I get, use my skill to control it as best I can, because I'm not going to the hardware store to find a smaller drill, but a smaller engraving bit, even if that actually exists. I don't know. So wish me luck. There's my widened hole. Looks pretty gross. And let's test to see the fit. Oh yeah, this will do the job. Absolutely, this will do the job. Okay, now that I've tested it out, it seems that this approach is going to work. I'm going to repeat this very same process on all the other arms. There's a little piece of advice or a tip, if you'd like, about using these rotary tools on your 40K models. I have found through making plenty of mistakes that you want your rotary tool mostly to rest on a really low setting, so a low speed. If you can control the speed of your rotary tool, like I can here, right, mine goes to 1, that's the slowest possible speed, and then 5, I think, is the fastest possible speed. I could not find one that goes to 11. Clearly that would be much, much faster, but whatever the case, I use the lowest setting because that reduces the heat that it generates. And these plastic pieces at around 3, so kind of between 2 and 3, depending on the work that I'm doing, the plastic will start to melt and the rotary tool will start to seize. Like, it gets all kinds of weird and difficult, and then you have plastic hardening on your drill bits. It's a really weird experience. Although I found that sometimes you do want that melting effect because it leaves kind of a smoother hole. So just be aware, for most of the work that you do, if you're going to use a rotary tool, try your lowest setting first. If that's not doing the job that you want, then you can kick it up a notch to get it to where you want it to go. So I've got the holes cut out. And I think I have an idea for how to glue these magnets together kind of side by side without having them fight me too much. And the trick, I think, is going to be to put them together at the same time. So I'll show you what I mean. So the idea is to get this stack of magnets, so these are equally sized, and I have this base here to kind of help me keep the orientation straight, the polarity orientation straight. So lay down some super glue there, and then stick them together like that at the same time. And that's going to help me avoid some of the fight. So if I put in one, let that dry, I'm going to have to apply some additional super glue, go in with another one, and it's going to want to move until it's absolutely dry. So doing it this way is going to be, I think, the way to help make that a little easier. However, they repel themselves they repel each other when they're like this. So this is the orientation, right? I want them to have the same polarity going in, but when they're side by side, they don't like it. They repel each other from the sides. See how they're kind of facing away? So I'm binding them up together with this larger magnet size, and when I'm putting them in, I'm just going to have to kind of keep them together and accept that there's going to be a little bit of a gap. So super glue them like that, let them dry, set them aside, and then do the same thing here. So you'll notice I've repeated this very same stack 4 times, and that's because I have 8 arms, so I want to do 4 of these at a time. So I'm going to glue this stack in, then I'll glue this stack in, etc., etc. Wait for them to dry, pull off the excess magnets, and repeat the process one more time. I think that's going to work. I'm not 100%, but you know, the math checks out. The math I didn't do at all. Let's lay down some super glue and get that party started. So I've got them set up and they're drying. So there's some super glue inside the arm. I've attached the stack of magnets and I'm letting them dry. A couple of things I'll point out so that you don't have to struggle with it as much as I did. So the first thing to point out is that you want to make sure that the hole is deep enough. So you might have to do a little bit of drilling, not a lot, just a little bit. You just want to make sure that the magnet is a little below flush. I have found that that's the best approach for magnetizing. If you make them flush, you might make a mistake, and then when you add the weapon to the mount, it's going to look a little funky. So make it below flush, especially since in this build we're going to cover this up with some epoxy putty, or maybe some green stuff. That'll probably work well in this application as well. So make sure it's deep enough. The second thing is make sure that your super glue is fast drying. So I used this stuff I bought on Amazon. It took forever to dry, and the whole time you're holding up these little 2 magnets, they're fighting each other, and it is a pain. I used this stuff with the other ones, and it worked a lot better. I held it in place for a couple of seconds. It seemed to do a decent job, and I was able to lay it down so I can dry it in place. The third thing is that this little daisy chain of arms, I wasn't intentional. It kind of, one of the arms accidentally stuck to the other arm, the magnets did. And I thought, ooh, that's a great way of making sure that these magnets are drying in place and they're not wiggling around very much. So each stack of magnets is attracting the magnets, kind of ahead of it. And so it adds a little bit of stability, which is important as it's drying. That way your magnets don't get wobbly and misaligned. It's not going to be perfect, but it is better than kind of just letting them set on their own. So now that I have these, I'm going to let them dry for a while, and I'll come back when I'm confident I can pull these apart. All right, my plan of attack worked, mostly. I have exactly 1 magnet, one magnet depth. So there's 1 magnet for each of these 2 that you see here. There's nothing behind them. It's just the one. And I've got all 6 arms. I think I said 8 at one point. That's clearly wrong because math is hard. But I've got 6 arms because I have 3 crisis suits. They all now have a pair of magnets side by side in that little slot. Now I say that it worked mostly because, so, putting them in at the same time, it worked most of the time. But sometimes, and this happens in a lot of magnetization projects, the super glue will get kind of, will land a little higher than you expect, and you end up with two kind of stuck together where you really only wanted one. And so when there's super glue involved, getting the excess magnet off can be difficult. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, and so when I pull these off, sometimes it pulled off the magnet that was in there that I did want. So there was a little bit of finessing of the magnets in the slot, which, it's laborious, it's tricky, it's kind of gross, but at least this part is done. So for the arms, the next step is to seal them off with a little epoxy putty. But before we do that, before I start sealing these off, right, because I want to seal them off so that they look good once the paint starts going on them later on. So instead of having this, painted over, I'm going to have kind of just a smooth area here. That's the idea, with the magnets hidden inside them. But before I do that, I want to add the magnets to the weapons themselves. And I'm going to do that before sealing this off because while I'm pretty sure that I'm going to get the polarities right, there's always a chance, there's a non-zero probability, as I like to call it, that you're going to mess up the orientation, and then you kind of have to, maybe, it shouldn't have to happen, but maybe you have to go in there and flip a polarity over. And so I won't seal this off until I'm absolutely sure that all the polarities are the way they should be. And I'm having some trouble with the focus feature. But before you seal this off, if that's an approach you want to take, you don't have to do that, but I'm doing it for aesthetic reasons. I want it to look a little nicer. Before you seal it off, make sure that all the orientations are exactly as you want them, because once you seal it, it's harder and trickier to undo. So now I'm going to go ahead and start making some holes here so I can sink a pair of magnets in this area. Now, one of the things that I just realized, so I'm looking at this weapon, right? Here's where you'll see where I clipped off the tab. I used these little snippers. I clipped off the tab so that I could add the magnet there and then just kind of stick it on there. But I just realized that there's actually two tabs. And so there's two tabs because apparently you can, if you're going to attach this to the, let's see, to the right left arm, then it goes like this. So there's a tab here. That's where that would go. So that's where the magnet would go. But if you attach it to the other arm, that's where it would attach here. So you could either put a magnet on this side and add another magnet on the other side, or you can just leave it with one magnet and just accept the fact that you can put it on one arm, and when you put it on the other arm, you're going to have to flip it over. And it's kind of a weird compromise to make, but I don't think that it amounts to that much. Like, is this weapon configuration like wrong versus this weapon configuration? I mean, technically, yes, it's supposed to be like this with the canister here facing downwards, but there's nothing that says that you can't just flip it over, right? And I think that's the approach I'm going to take. Now, obviously, here the pilot light is at the top where it's usually at the bottom, but I think that's fine. So this is one of those decisions that you're going to have to make for yourself. If you want 100% fidelity, then you're going to have to, clip off both tabs and add a magnet to each side of the weapon, which is considerably more work. And so for me, I don't know that it's worth the extra effort. I'm going to be happy with just attaching it this way, and then the other arm attaching it this way. I think that's going to be fine for me. It may not be fine for you, so choose whatever you think is going to work best for you. There's also the possibility of adding it to the top part of the weapon, right here. This would actually be a better option, because you can attach it this way, or you can attach it this way. So maybe, I know I've already clipped off these tabs, but that's okay. I can sand it flat, and then just attach the magnets to the top of the weapon. I think that actually might be a better way to go. Yeah, so it looks like for most of these weapons, you do have a choice between top and one of the two sides. On this weapon, kind of the Gatling laser looking thing, that isn't a concern. There's only one tab that goes at the very top. So my recommendation is, pick one, probably the top part. That's going to be the option where you don't have to worry about the orientation of the weapon. For me, I'm just going to sand this down and pretend like there wasn't a tab here. That should be totally fine. So I'm going to start making these holes and cut off this new tab for starters. But it's the same idea. You're going to make a guide hole, and then probably with a drill bit, and then widen the guide hole with this engraving tool to give you enough space to add two magnets side by side, making sure that the orientations are correct. Once you've clipped off the tabs, go in there with a sanding stick or whatever your preferred method is. Sand it down nice and flat. Smooth it out, so you don't have any weird, unsightly bumps. And if you, by mistake, clipped off any extra tabs, I'd do the same thing there. Here, I want to flatten out just a little bit more before I sand it. But, just make sure the surface is nice and flat, so you don't get any unsightly bumps when you paint this up. So I'm still working on getting these magnets attached to the weapons, and I'm going to tell you, man, it is laborious. And it's not particularly, it's not looking really good either. I think part of it's might be my skill level, but this idea of having the two magnets kind of side by side, it is difficult. It is not easy peasy lemon squeezy. It's lemon difficult lemon. It's hard to get them aligned kind of straight, so when they go on the arms, they're a little crooked. I've had to cut off quite a bit of the weapon, which doesn't look great. The plan is to go back in there with some epoxy putty and kind of cover it up, rebuild the shape after the magnets are in there. But it is a ton of work. There's so many, and the work itself is so finicky. It is just, I don't recommend it. If you're going to do this, I would probably recommend that you try just a single magnet, because so I've kind of tested these on the arms. So here, I'll show you. This set is actually already dry. So here's the arm and here's the weapon, and when you put them on, right, it works, but you still get that spinny thing. It's a little more secure, but it's still kind of spinny. I don't know that adding that second stack of magnets, in other words, having two magnets side by side as opposed to one, I don't know that it's buying you anything extra. So my idea to limit its ability to spin in place, yeah, it didn't work out as I expected, which is too bad, because now I'm stuck doing all of these, knowing full well it doesn't work the way I wanted to. I know it's not buying me what I wanted to, and so now it's just work. But I've done it for so many that I'm stuck. I'm going to keep doing it just because I had to keep doing it. So I'm going to show you. I still haven't finished with all of them. There's a lot of cutting away. There's a lot of gluing and letting dry, then glue. It's it's a process, right? But I wanted to show you, while this stuff dries, I wanted to show you my next step. So for some of these pieces, they're ready to go. They're ready to be kind of reconditioned, rebuilt into their final form. And so here I have some epoxy putty. It's the Tamiya epoxy putty. This is the quick type. And so I'm putting it in the crevices. So I'll show you. Here's what it looks like after the magnets are added. Here's what it looks like after the epoxy putty is added. And so it's, you know, nice and smooth. You can't see the magnets. It's not a ton of work, although in my experience, working with epoxy putty is never like fun. But the idea is to add just another bit of kind of friction. So I'm putting a little dollop right in that hole, and I'm squishing it in kind of like so. So it gets into all the spaces where there is no magnet and there is no glue. And then I'm just kind of pulling off any excess. And then I'm going in with the hobby knife. You can use other tools, but I'm just kind of going in there, removing some of the excess I couldn't get with my finger. Pulling that off. And then just kind of giving it a slide. And that gives me the smooth, well, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. That'll give me kind of a smoother surface, or at least even surface. And before this is all said and done, like once it's dry, you can go back in there and sand it so it's even smoother. But this hides the magnets. It gives you a nice way of painting over those pieces that have been, you know, kind of mauled by your drill bits and stuff like that, to make it look less magnetized, but still have the impact of having a magnetized model. I think it's, you know, it's a step that I don't always take, because sometimes having the magnets show up is fine. But in this case, I think it's worth the extra effort, especially since we cut away so much. And I think it's going to be an even bigger value when we do the weapons. So like here, for example, I really don't want my final product looking like this. It's pretty gross, so I'm going to build up some of the surface that's here, and hopefully that'll, you know, boost its longevity and certainly make it look a little nicer than it otherwise would look. So one of the things I was having trouble with as I'm, you know, still making these holes for some of these weapons, is that using this rotary tool, I necessarily make round holes. That's just the way rotary tools work. And round holes and a line of magnets don't really mix. There's too much of a curve, and so the magnets aren't really sitting on the plastic. They're kind of sitting on one of the sides or the other, and then there's nothing beneath them, you know. And the idea is, well, I'll just fill it in with super glue or something else, but it still isn't a really good solution. And so I was racking my brain, how do I flatten these out? How do I flatten these out with this round tool, with this rotary tool? And much too late, I remembered I have these guys. These are jewelry files. These do have flat edges, and I could use them to create the flatness that I need. And it's just sad that I didn't think about this until, you know, kind of near the end of this part of the project. Had I done this from the beginning, I would have had much better results, a lot less frustration. But, you know, you live and learn. And so I thought I would share this tip for you in case you get really kind of bogged down with the rotary tool. Sometimes the rotary tool isn't the best tool for the job. Sometimes you got to go a little manual, and that's okay, because you get, you know, more adequate results. This is almost flat enough where I can get these two magnets in there and to have them lay flat on that bed of plastic. It's hard to see here, but kind of like So it's not flat, it's not wide enough yet, but I have to widen up. I'm going to do that manually. But you know, that's the idea. I am finally done. Look at all these magnetized pieces. There's so much here. I haven't cleaned them up yet, but I just wanted to show you what everything looks like before it's finished up. So here are the arms, here's a weapon, and the results are kind of substandard. Sometimes the weapons are too heavy to hold with these magnets, sometimes they're not. I think part of it is that I haven't sanded down these pieces, so they don't make great contact all the time, but there you have it. The parts are all magnetized, they all work. I mean, I'm pretty sure they all work. I haven't tested every combination, but yeah, things should work. So at this point, I'm going to sand this down to make them look a little better than they look right now. So there's a lot of that to do. I suspect you don't want to see me doing that, but I'll fast forward because this is as mind-numbing as you might expect. But it's part of the process. Part of the process. Alright, so I've done all the sanding, and so the pieces look a little less rough than they were before. And it kind of did improve the contact with some, but this rifle continues to vex me. It is too heavy in the front. Oh, look. Okay, so I guess that did help things. This was the weapon that was kind of swinging all over the place. Maybe it's some? Yeah, so some are stronger than others, it looks like. Yeah, this one's janky AF. I don't know what happened here. Maybe there's a magnet missing. I don't know. But I just kind of wanted to show you, now that the sanding is done, they look better, but they still look pretty rough, right? So through the magic of editing, I want to show you what it looks like when they're primed. Now, I'm not ready to prime and paint the whole model, but I do want to show you these bits, kind of the before and after. So here they are before. Wait. Here they are before. Wait. Okay, how about now? Here they are before priming. And here they are now that they're primed. And they clearly still look modified, but it's quite a bit better than what they were before. And just to give you a sense of contrast, I'll show you this guy. Oh, no. Versus this guy. Quite a bit of difference. You can still tell it's magnetized, you can still tell something happened there, but it's nowhere near evident. So the point is, when you're going to go and paint these things, you're buying yourself quite a bit of difference. That looks pretty junky. That looks less junky. Not, you know, perfect, but it's a much, much better deal. And once you finish painting and washing and all the kind of good stuff, you'll hardly be able to tell that you did anything at all. Alright, that's an exaggeration. Here we go. Here's what the weapons look like on the model. They're not, you know, 100% stable. Again, I've mentioned that probably shouldn't spend the extra time with a double, kind of the side-to-side magnets. It's not, I mean, okay, so there's a little resistance, but it's not, you know, I don't know that it's worth the expenditure of time to do this. So this next thing that I'm going to magnetize, because there's more to magnetize than just the weapons. There are some accessories that go on these little like jetpack pylon deals. So stuff like this. This is like a missile pod. It goes in here, I think. Yeah. So you got something like that. You've got this thing, whatever it is. Goes on here. So there's a couple of different options. I'm sure they're like, I don't know, like optics and radar dishes, maybe some comm stuff. Whatever the case may be, they go on these pylons and you have some options. And so I've got two of these optic looking pylon deals as optical sensors or whatever kind of sensors. I've got three of these missile pods. These are probably the smart missile pods. I've got one of these big deals. I have no idea what this is. You know, I am not a towel player, so I don't actually know what I'm doing, but this looks like something important because there's only one of them, and we've got two of these other things, basically one of those little radio antennas, little radar dish. Now there's two of these, and the faces are not swappable, but you can add one of three options to each of these things, so there's going to be one man left out. Since I'm magnetizing, I could have gone through the trouble of magnetizing this dish to this little thing right here and then just kind of swap them out as needed. I don't know that it needs to be, I don't know that you need to do any of that. As a matter of fact, you probably don't need to do any of this. You don't need to magnetize these units. It's going to be a lot of work for a relatively little buck. So I don't recommend it. I'm doing it because I have a YouTube channel and I think you guys like to watch me suffer, which is cool. That means you like me to suffer. Still, I'll take the first part. So you don't really need to do this. I don't recommend it. But since you're watching this, I'm going to do it. And it should be relatively straightforward, right? Because you're just going to add a small magnet here. So I'm going to take this off. This is that jetpack thruster kind of pylon thing. There's going to be a magnet right there. And it'll be a corresponding magnet underneath here. So these little tabs, they go into these slots like so. So you remove the tabs, drill a hole in there for a magnet. Here, drill a hole for a magnet, and you're set. You've got yourself an accessory. I don't know for a fact that you can do this on both sides. So for each model, there's two pylons or thruster deals, doohickeys. I don't know that you can take, one on each side. You might be able to, but as long as I'm doing this, I'm just going to do them both. So a magnet here, times 3 models, and then a magnet underneath each of these, again, making sure the polarities all work the way you expect them to. And I'm not going to get fancy. I'm just going to go with the smallest possible magnet that'll fit, which means, I do have some concerns about whether they'll be strong enough. I don't rightfully know. They probably will not be, so I might make the extra effort to sink in 2 magnets here, and where possible, like for these larger ones, I'll sink 2 magnets in here. That's the plan. So for these smaller ones, I think a single magnet will do. These are rare earth magnets, they'll be fine, I think. But for these big ones, or like for this chunky boy right here, I think it makes sense to do a double stack here, and then a double stack on each of these. So it's going to be a lot of magnets. It's going to be a lot of drilling. Nobody said nobody recommended I have a YouTube channel. I found that whenever I'm drilling, magnetizing, I have to make liberal use of my little hand vac. I'm glad I have it because drilling produces a ton of residue stuff. I've made the holes, so I've drilled out the hole. This should be wide enough to fit one of these magnets, so I can put a double stack in there. I'm also going to go ahead and, before I move on, I do want to make sure that I fill this gap. So right now, let's just say I wanted to glue the magnets on there. What am I gluing it to? There's nothing there to glue. This goes all the way in. So I want to make an artificial back. I don't want it to just be glued to the sides. I want it to be glued onto something on the back there, so that when I sink the double stack, it rests on something. And so I'll use some epoxy putty. I'll fill in that spot real good, and then I'll push exactly 2 magnets into that spot, let it dry, and that should do the trick. But before I break out the Tamiya epoxy putty, I'm going to get these pieces ready. So these are the options that will be attached. They all have this little tab. I'm going to get rid of said tab, like so. So these are the pieces that basically limited the size of the magnets. That's why I went with the smallest magnet I have, because they had to fit into these little narrow spots. None more narrow perhaps than this missile pod, or maybe it's this guy, I'm not sure. Either way, I'm going to have a really tough time drilling out the right size hole without breaking the piece or kind of carving out the sides. So I have to be very, very careful with these. And there's a good chance I'm going to mess these up, or at least some of them. But I'm going to try my best. Yeah, when you drill these out, you want to be really, really slow. I'm using the lowest setting on my rotary tool, and I'm just pushing it in very gently, because it's very, very easy to overpenetrate, and it's very, very easy to break the boundary. You don't want to drill a hole so it shows up out here. You want it to be exactly in the center. Slow and steady wins this particular race. Got my epoxy putty all rolled up. I usually wait for it to dry a little bit, but I think I need it a little more malleable than usual, because I want to jam a little plug into that hole. So I drilled a hole in every one of these little rocket packs, and that's where the magnet's going to live. But the magnets are a little too thin right now, and I made the hole a little extra wide, so that I wouldn't have any problems getting the magnets in there. But I do want that backing. So I'm going to roll out a little bit of this epoxy putty. I'm going to roll it out in kind of a little Play-Doh snake and kind of jam it in there to make sure there's a little bit below the surface of the hole before I start jamming things in there. In fact, I'll add another little bit. So by adding this little bit of epoxy putty, I've covered up most of that slot. So I want to make sure then that it looks intentional, and so I'm covering up the rest of it with a little bit more epoxy putty, so that it looks like it's going to be one smooth area, as opposed to a place where I put epoxy putty and didn't get it all the way in. It needs to be a little smoother than that, though. Right, and the rest I should be able to catch with a little bit of sanding, but I want to grab 2 magnets, a little double stack here, and insert them in this hole like so. So now the magnets are inside that epoxy putty, and it's a little below flush, so that when I am ready to put these together, they won't kind of mess around, and they won't kind of jut out. The weapon pack won't jut out from the thing. It'll just kind of be flush like that. I find that putting the magnets kind of below flush is a pretty good technique. It works pretty well. Right, more Play-Doh snakes. The magnets are all in place now, and they're covered up with the putty. It looks really gross, but I'm not about to fix that. I just want to make sure that everything works. Yeah, so everything is working the way it should for the most part, so far as I can tell. But it looks kind of like garbage, so now it's time for us to clean this up a bit. I'm going to scrape off some of this excess putty and sand off the rest. Just want to show you what these look like once they've been scraped and sanded and all that kind of good stuff. So they're relatively clean. They're not perfect, but I think they'll do the job pretty well. And so now that I've cleaned them up, they do fit on there quite a bit better. So you'll see these missile packs, this targeting thingy, this other targeting thingy. So you can swap them out at will. They'll work on any one of these pylons. So when the model is fully assembled, you can just swap these components however you want to configure your crisis suits. So the last step in this process is I'm going to prime them up. Just so you see what it looks like once everything is done. The painting will be done separately in a different video, but I want you to get a sense for how they'll look without all the gross stuff on them. So much like the arms, how we've hidden a lot of the magnetization work, we're going to hide this and this as well. Again, it won't be perfect, but it'll be pretty darn close. Here they are, my new set of crisis suits. They're really, really white. I've got 3 of them, but I can only hold up 2 at a time. And they're fully magnetized, as you've seen in the video that preceded it. Of course, the jetpack deals, those are not magnetized because those are going to be permanently attached. But they're not permanently attached yet because I don't attach them until I'm done painting them. So I have them temporarily on as, with a little sticky tack. And so there you have it. So they've got quite a lot of magnetization options, and this is just not going to stay. So they have quite a few options. As you can see, we have these accessory weapons. The arms are not magnetized either, nor are they permanently attached. So everything's dangling a little bit. The point is, the stuff that I intended to magnetize is now magnetized. So you have these hard points on the thruster packs. You can swap out all the different little options there. You have these hard points. You have these hard points where the weapons come on and off. You can swap out from a variety of weapons, some of which are apparently a little heavier than others, so this one's not going to hold as well. I'm not sure how I would do this differently. I can't really fit another set of magnets on there. It's already got a double stack here, a double stack here. Actually, no, single stack here, double stack here. Maybe it could have gone too deep with that one, so that's something for you to think about. But yeah, you can swap out a variety of weapons, and they mostly hang out pretty nicely. And so really the point of this part of the video is just going to show you what it looks like once all the magnetization is done. And it's not bad. Like, when you remove stuff, like, you can tell there's something there, but it doesn't look half bad. The magnetization itself also doesn't look half bad. So yeah, if you decide not to go with any of these options, you can have a model that looks a little bit like that. So you can kind of still tell there's magnets in there, but it won't be as obvious. Although when I do the painting, it's going to have the little circles where the wash is going to seep into, and That's fine. I could have done a better job with covering that up, but that's not really my strong suit. Hopefully you have better skills, but it's certainly better than the alternative. So there you have it. Crisis suits, fully magnetized. If you decide you want to do this for yourself, good luck. It was a lot of work, and I don't know that you're going to get a lot of bang for your buck, and you're going to have a ton of these little weapons and these little accessory deals just kind of hanging out in your box. But, you know, you're going to have the tactical flexibility. If you have more than one squad, well, you're going to do this a couple of times. The only other thing that I wanted to point out, which I thought was pretty neat, is... Oh yeah, okay, it's this guy. When you're putting these together, here, I'll clean off the weapons so you can kind of focus on what I'm talking about. When you're putting this together, you're going to have the option of having like one of these three being a special unit. And the specialness is denoted, I think, by these leg armor plates, so you can kind of see how they're different than these armor plates. These are a little bit more complicated. The shoulder pad is a little bit more complicated. See what I mean? So it was kind of cool to do that. Also, the knee pads are also a little different. So that was a neat little experience. This is, I guess, like the sergeant of the squad. So, you know, keep an eye out for that. You can make them all kind of, I guess, basic like this guy, or you can make one of them kind of a special unit. And probably when you paint them up, since these differences are so subtle, I'd probably paint them with a different color head or some kind of marking that picks them out as this guy is special. So that was it. The magnetization wasn't all that complicated. It was just laborious. So if you have to, this shows you how you can get it done, but I don't recommend it. Maybe some of it. Some of it's fine. You know? Are you going to use the flamers? I don't know. Maybe. If not, you know, just permanently attach one of these deals, or go with this pulse rifle thing and just going to permanently attach that. But I hope you learned something. I hope that if you're going to try this project, I hope you don't, but if you do, this should give you an idea of how it's accomplished, how you could do it, and with any luck, you can improve upon my results. At any rate, thank you very much for watching. You've been watching Your Average Bear Gaming. I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Be nice to yourselves and each other.